Okay, going back to the beginning of the Oscars. And the next movie is Tempest, is what it's gonna. Oh, this being live is probably a bad idea. There's been another disqualification for best art direction. The winner was William Cameron Menzies, or how you pronounce it. He won it for two pictures. One was Tempest, which I'm about to review, and the other was The Dove. And the Dove is only partially intact. I guess they only have like 4 reels out of 10 of the full movie. But that's in the Library of Congress, if you needed to know that. But yeah, so The Dove, can't review it. It's not a complete movie anymore, unfortunately. Or the other movie that was nominated and won is The Tempest, or just Tempest. The Tempest is completely different. Okay, let's explain the whole story of the movie now. I think I'll start doing that maybe. Maybe. I don't know. Everything's trial and error right now, I feel like. This movie was actually a very complex one. More complex than I thought any silent film could be, really. At least story-wise. At least the way it was presented story-wise. Just there was a lot of layers to it that I was impressed with and surprised by, just because it's a silent movie, and silent movies usually really aren't that complex. Aside from a few outliers like Intolerance, for example. Maybe I'll review Intolerance by itself at some point. It's far too early for the Oscars. I think that movie came out in 1916, something like that. It was a very early movie. But in this movie, John Barrymore plays the main character of Ivan. Oh, and it takes place in Russia in 1914. And he's like a peasant at the beginning of the movie, but then he's like conscripted. Then he's drafted into the army, basically. And the princess of all Russia, I forget what her name was. I just forget. It was like Savannah or something like that. Slavana. I don't know. That's wrong. I'll just call her the princess. So the princess of all Russia kind of helps him get drafted because they're like kind of suspicious of him at first. Like a peasant can't be a sergeant, but like he's the higher ups are like checking him out and looking at his papers, and they're just like, a peasant can't be a sergeant. Who would do this? What were we thinking? And then the princess comes in and looks over like his like technical specs or whatever, the medical report or something, and psychological evaluation or whatever the equivalent it is in 1914 Russia. And he's like, A plus, flying colors, the most loyal person in Russia or something. And she's like, oh, he's too, she said something that I thought was clever. It was, oh man, this perfect doesn't deserve to live, right? But then after that, John Barrymore, or Ivan, I guess I should call him, like the first time he sees the princess, right after that, he like falls madly in love with her. But then he like dances with her at a dance, but she like kind of puts him down a little bit, being like, well, a princess can't love a peasant, or so. She says something like that. I forget. But so he kind of walks away from her and gets really depressed for a while, because he's kind of pining for her. But and he gets very drunk. That's like the important bit almost. Oh, but while he's doing that, she's like kind of watching him. She's like starts dancing with someone else, but she's still watching him, and kind of, you tell she's like more interested in him than the person she's dancing with. But then John Barrymore or Ivan, I did it again. Ivan gets very drunk, and he like breaks into the princess's bedroom, and he like finds this bouquet of flowers with like a love note in it, and he gets really jealous, and like finds her locket, or one of her lockets, like a piece of jewelry, and carves in "I love you" and then Ivan at the bottom. and then he drunkenly passes out in her bed, and then she comes in, finds him there, and he wakes up and declares he's madly in love with her or something. But then she's like, guards, come in, and the guards come and take him away, and then he's stripped of his rank and thrown in prison. Oh, and when that happens, one of his friends from the army then the person in charge comes down. He's like, "What are you doing here?" And he like kind of insults them and throws his all his army decorations like on his shoulders, and his rank on the ground. And he's like, "Ugh, whatever." But then he throws him in jail too. He's like, "Ah, we shouldn't be apart," or something like that. Just like kind of because they're buddies. And I just thought that was kind of funny. There's a lot of humor in this movie. I don't know if I mentioned that, because it's basically a drama. I would call it a drama, but at the same time, there's like a lot of humor throughout. Enough that I would maybe call it like an early dramedy. I don't know if they really did that back then. Drama and comedy are basically very separate, I wouldn't recommend doing a dramedy if you're just getting into screenwriting or something. I don't know. Never mind. But then the princess finds his locket that he wrote the letter to her on. It says he's madly in love with her, or whatever it said. And she kind of falls in love with him. And it's kind of weird. Just because I don't think she really falls in love with him until she finds that locket. But then she kind of starts pining for him, and eventually it like gets so bad, I guess, for her that she eventually goes down to the prison to talk to him, and she like sequesters him into his own cell and confronts him with the locket. But at that point he like hates her because she locked him in prison. And so it's like an interesting dynamic, especially in something like this, just because she's kind of been pining for him for so long, and but he's just been rotting in prison because of her. She almost but not quite throws herself at him, kind of, just in like how she's doing this, but she's still a princess, so she's just like kind of reserved about it, I guess. But he hates her, so he's basically just like no, and then gets the guard to take it back to his cell. And then war breaks out because Russia, I guess that was before one of the big Russian revolutions, due to the corruption of power, like it always is, basically. And then she and her father, the king, are like trapped in the palace, basically. They basically been sequestered there, or like they're trapped there because like the revolution is basically right outside the gates, almost. And they're like, oh no, what do we do? And but meanwhile, Ivan is still locked in prison, and he's like slowly going insane. An image of her kind of like keeps haunting him because he hates her, and he sees her as being his captive and everything. Her captor, I mean. He's her captive. Oh, there's something I forgot, and that's that the entire time since the beginning of the movie, there's been like this hobo who kept like coming visiting with Ivan to like feed him like little bits of information, be like, like the first line of the movie, the first actual intertitle is him saying to him something like, someday we're gonna need a peasant like you to be king of Russia. But he's like friendly to this guy because he's just a hobo, and he gives him some soup or something and sends him on his way. And like even when he's in prison, he like pokes his head and stuff. And says something like, darkness is upon us, war is coming, or things, just things like that, just things that are like cryptic and things. But only he sees him up to this point. There's even like a point when like right after he gets thrown in prison, his face is like superimposed over a fire, and he's like laughing, cackling madly. And I thought like, oh, is he supposed to be like the devil or something? And that's why only Ivan can see him. But then, fast forward to where we are in the movie now, and Ivan's been rotting in prison while this war is going on. His buddy who got thrown in prison with him from the army, like, shows up suddenly, and just, like, he bursts open his cell. He's like, I'm here to rescue you, Ivan, because I'm your best friend, man. Let's get those Ruskies, even though we're also Ruskies. And Ivan's just like, how did you find me? How? And then he's just like, oh, this guy helped me. And it was like, it was the bum that was his friend. And that's the first time you realize, oh, this actually is another person, not like a figment of his imagination or something, or the devil or whatever he's supposed to be. But then he steps out of his prison cell, and the very first thing that his friend does to him is he wraps his grand cloak around him so he looks completely different because he's not in his prison rags or whatever. Well, I guess he still is, but now there's a cloak around him. I don't know, whatever. And then the bum says to him, like, I told you that we'll need a peasant to lead us, or something like that. He becomes the leader of the rebellion, basically. Ivan does. And they end up invading the palace, and they capture the king and everything. But the princess, while this is happening, the king was captured a while ago on the front. But once they get to the palace, the princess has been like giving her stuff away to the poor and stuff because she realized that she's been, I guess, selfish or something. It's not very well explained. It would have helped if this were talkie. I'll get to that in a minute, maybe. But they get there and they like take over the palace and they're like declare him the ruler, and then it like cuts to like a month later or something. And now the bum is like the head judge, and he's just like saying like, let's kill all the aristocrats. And Ivan comes down to like confront him and be like, what are you doing? First the king is killed, but Ivan tries to stop it, because they're gonna do a firing squad. They're gonna kill him with a firing squad, and Ivan like comes in at the last possible moment, but he's too late, and they shot him already, and he catches the king, and the king's like, I'm glad at least that I died when my Russia fell. or something like. He says something like that. So Ivan confronts the bum, and bum's just like, I want to kill all the aristocrats. And he's also like signing a death warrant for Ivan, because he's like, you showed sympathy because you helped that general at the very end of his life. You know, you showed sympathy to an enemy, because therefore you're just as bad as all the aristocrats, and you should die. So then they have a duel to the death, basically. I mean, they just wrestle with a gun until it goes off. That trope is at least this old. And the bum dies, and Ivan lives, and then but before the firing squad happened, that's when he finally confronts the princess. That scene was kind of funny in a way. It just... I found it funny anyway. Because, like, he came in and, like, just started spouting everything, you know, to her. Be like, you're a horrible aristocrat. You've done this to Russia. Russia was run into the ground under your rule. And then he, like, all this other stuff too, like, and you did all these horrible things to me. You threw me in prison. I lost my mind and, like, went through all these horrors because of you. And the entire time she's, like, just kind of, like, she's looking more and more sorry for herself. You know, as he's, like, spouting out all these horrible things she did to him. And, like, but at the same time, they're, like, getting closer and closer together until finally she just falls into him, and he grabs her and embraces her, and they're just in love. And I just thought that was really funny in a way, just because, like, he's, like, spouting, he's, like, really angry and spouting all these things off, and then they just bone right there. They do in my mind. But then all this stuff happens, and the bum dies, and they're going to, like, declare Ivan king or something. While they're, like, discussing that, Ivan, like, gets out of the room, and then he goes and finds the girl, and they take a sled and leave. And I thought that was, like, a cool ending, I think, just in that, like, she's a princess, he's a pauper, they're in love, and they're just like, screw Russia, and get the fuck out of there. And I greatly enjoyed this movie. I was very surprised by it and impressed, just because it is a film from the silent era, and you don't really expect them to say so much about so many things. I think that's partly why it took place in Russia, probably because it was trying to say something about America at the time that is probably still true about America now, if you want to be honest about it. But our movies are more upfront about our messages, I think, most of the time. Those political messages. But this one was pretty upfront, I think. It had a lot of overtones of classism, and why things like a peasant getting with a princess is a ridiculous idea, but why is it a ridiculous idea, you know? Like, ask questions like that. Or why do we consider something like that, like, taboo to some degree? Or like, the thing with the devil, I thought, was another thing, was interesting touch. You know, like, because he turned out not to be the devil, but, like, for the whole first half of the movie, like, really played with that trope, I guess, of, like, a person having the imaginary friend who's also some sort of evil entity or something that's just feeding him false information. But then it turns out it's just a person in his imagination, or is it? Ha ha ha, type of thing. But then it turned out it was a real person, and that was just, like, them playing with that trope and tricking the audience. Which, again, I thought was interesting. I didn't really think movies of that era, because movies were still so new, like, would have that many cliches to break the cliche of, basically. But that's what they do here, and I thought that was neat. I also thought it was a neat idea of, like, the woman playing the princess, or, like, just the princess, slowly falling in love with him when he like, falls in love with her immediately, and then, like, but there's, like, this immediate attraction and stuff, and I think they show that really well. Is more believable than most romances of this era, because it's usually very, like, fairy tale-esque, I guess, in a way. And this one kind of was too, but if it was opposite of the way it normally was. Again, playing with those cliches, because it was the man falling in love with her, like, immediately, and then she's the one who slowly over time gains the same affection. Also, I've noticed that there seems to be a few themes that the Academy Award movies I'm watching for the current Oscars and the first Oscars, like, they seem to have a lot of shared themes. I mean, I always think it's kind of weird when movies all have a lot of the same themes in, like, a big clump. And I'll do a video that discusses that when I'm done with any of the Oscars or something. But this one wasn't as big as, like, some of the other ones I've watched so far. But this did have the bum character who's not the devil, but, like, was just manipulating all of them the whole time. Oh, that was the other thing I thought was kind of clever, because it kind of felt like, and I'm not sure if this is entirely true, but it felt like the bum was just manipulating him the whole time. Like the bum kind of, maybe he got him thrown in prison somehow. Like they remade this for a modern day. They should have that be the big twist. Just that like he like put all the events into place to get this guy on the throne, basically. I don't think that was entirely the case for this one, but he was definitely a very manipulative person, and by the end was just trying to get Ivan out of the way so then he could be the ruler, I'm assuming. The theme of like really toxic and manipulative people in that way, like the highly narcissistic, psychopathic type of way, not in the normal just I like blowing stuff up and killing people type of way. Type that's more about manipulating the people that think they love them. Betraying your friends and family, as it were. Just being a self-centered piece of shit type of person. But yeah, that seems to be the theme of a lot of these first Oscar nominees and the current ones. Just thought I'd point that out. I might talk about it more with the next review because I'm doing 2 more tonight. There are a couple things that I feel were a bit detracting. The first is that there were points that were really melodramatic, or over-dramatic is what I should say. And that would have been fine, except like each time it happened, it lasted for like 5 minutes of screen time. And it was just like, why is this going on for so long? And the other thing is there was like too few intertitles, I felt. Because like they would have the people talking to each other for very long times, and then only have like one intertitle for that whole time, you know? Just like have people go, because it's silent, you know, and then finally at the end of that conversation, here's the one intertitle that just says, "Hi, how are you?" or something, you know, just something like very short, considering like, well, what else did they say? Or is it just like we're supposed to guess, I guess, just know from their facial expressions about what they said? And I guess you could basically determine that sort of sometimes, but like at points it was like this needed more intertitles just for this point. And maybe those intertitles got lost or something. Lost in a fire, who knows? I don't know. Stuff like that happened. Like, we have all the reels, but for some reason the intertitles went missing. And it was like, well, why weren't they in the reels? I don't know. Just stuff like that happened all the time, though. But outside of that, I would have given this a 10 out of 10. But just for those minor things, they're very minor. I'd probably just reduce it by half a point. Just 9.5 out of 10. But actually, I'd increase it again, just for how complex this movie was for its time period and how well made and written it was, too. I really enjoyed it, actually. So yeah, 10 out of 10. Great movie. There I go with my thumbs again. All thummy. Like, really something else for its time period. Really stands out, ahead of its time, and has almost like a truthful, honest message about classism, which is basically just get the fuck out. And I really like that. I like the ending a lot. I think that almost made the rest of the movie for me. Except the rest of the movie is also really good. So, so yeah, please like and subscribe. Try to do at least one video every day. Not always reviews, but usually reviews during Oscar season.